Today in our 2012 Chevrolet Silverado 3500 HD, we're going to be taking a look at and installing the Airlift Load Lifter 5000 air helper springs for the rear axle, part number AL57338. Here's what this helper spring kit's going to look like once it's installed on the vehicle. What's really nice about these air helper springs being able to help level out the ride of your vehicle with a heavy load is that when your vehicle's leveled out, that's going to keep your headlights level so you'll be able to see the road properly. It's going to help reduce irregular tire wear. It's going to improve braking performance because you'll have proper weight distribution between the front and rear wheels. And it will also help with side-to-side body roll, especially with a heavy load. It sits on top of the rear axle here and goes to the mounting plate that's up on the bottom side of the frame. So this is going to help to support the rear of the vehicle when there's a load, and that way the factory leaf springs aren't taking all of the load, and these are able to help. And these are able to help level a load up to 5,000 pounds. These air springs are adjustable from 5 to 100 psi. They've got a very nice durable construction. With the brackets that come on this, it actually gives you the option that you can either mount it using U-bolts, or you can mount it using this self-tapping bolt right here by drilling a hole into the frame. And by mounting it with this, it's going to leave that bracket flush with the bottom of the frame, which is going to allow you to still use any type of fifth wheel or gooseneck hitch on your truck. It's not going to obstruct the side plates that'll bolt to the frame. And that differs from some of the other air helper springs out there because some of the other ones are going to vary application to application. We're going to take a measurement at the front and rear fender in order to see without any weight in the bed of the truck. This measurement's going to be with just the manufacturer's factory suspension installed. Then we'll move back to the rear and take that same measurement from the ground to the middle of the fender well here. So now we'll put this water tank in the rear to give some weight in the bed, and we can take those same measurements again. And the front looks to have gone up about 1/4 of an inch, and at the rear has come down about 1.5 inches. Now that we've taken our measurements with the water tank in the bed of the truck, let's take it out on our test course and see how the factory suspension responds. Through our Slalom, you can see that the suspension is flexing, and that's allowing body roll. So there's a little bit of instability there as we go through the Slalom, making hard, quicker turns. Over the alternating speed bumps, you can see the suspension flex and articulate in order to compensate for the weight that's in the bed, and that makes for a pretty stiff ride. So now we've got our airbags installed in the truck, and we've put that water tank back in the bed. So let's take those measurements again. Here at the front, we've come back to factory ride height. And here at the rear, it has also come back to factory ride height. And the reason we give you these measurements is so you can see the difference that the airbags make with the factory suspension and how it helps to level it back out to provide that safer ride. Now with the airbags installed, we'll take it through that road course again. Going through the slaloms, it feels much more solid and there's not nearly as much body roll, so it feels a lot more stable and secure. Then going through the alternating speed bumps, the suspension seems to recover a lot faster, and it doesn't seem to cause the suspension to articulate as much. And that's going to help prolong the life of the suspension. Now, let's show you how to install this air helper spring kit. I've gone ahead and removed the spare tire in order to give myself more room to work underneath the truck. Now, first thing we'll need to do in order to begin our installation is we'll need to remove this Jounce bumper. And in order to do that, we'll need to get a large screwdriver or some sort of pry bar up along the side here and pry it out of there. This is just in there by friction. And it should just pop right out of there. Now we'll need to take this bolt out that holds this wire Ebrake bracket in. Give me a 13mm socket to do that. Then we can take this bracket and remove it from the Ebrake line because we won't be reinstalling this wire bracket. Next thing we'll need to do is remove this bracket that holds the brake line in. There's a bolt that goes in right there. It's 13mm. Need to remove that so that we have the space so that we'll be able to get our lower bracket slid in right there. Now let's get our air spring assembled so that we can get it up into place. So first thing we'll need to do is take one of these roll plates, and we'll need to take this rounded edge, and it's going to go down from the top here. Then once we've got that set on there, we can take our 90-degree elbow air fitting and begin to thread it into the hole. Then just that nut part is what spins to thread it in. You don't need to turn that. So then you can take a 7/16 wrench, and once you get it hand tight, you just want to make another 1.5 to 2 full turns to make sure it's in there securely and that the thread sealant has engaged. So once that's on there, I can take the upper bracket and put it down into place, and that little notched out U right there, that's going to go around that air fitting. We'll line it up, and this one's for the driver's side, and it's got an L that's etched in it right there. Then we'll take 2 of our Flathead 3/8 bolts and begin to thread them down into the threaded holes on the top of our air spring. Once we've got them started, you'll need a 7/32 Allen key in order to tighten these down. There isn't a torque spec given for these, so once you've got them both tight, you'll want to just give them another 1/4 to 1/2 turn. That way you know they're nice and tight and won't run the risk of loosening up over time. So now let's flip it over and install the bottom plate. You want to make sure that you have it oriented correctly, because this is going to go towards the inside of the frame on the truck, and these are going to go out towards the leaf spring. So you want to make sure that it's lined up correctly, and don't forget your roll plate. You use 2 more of your 3/8 flathead bolts in order to secure that bottom plate down. Let's take our air spring assembly, slide it into place over the axle. You'll need to watch out for the brake lines that come down here so that you don't accidentally get caught on them and damage them. As you put it up into place, you need to make sure that that fitting is towards the inside, and then this will go up around the Jounce housing there, so you want it to sit flush. I'm using this pole jack in order to help lift this axle back up, because you need to let this axle hang freely so that you can fit the air spring assembly in there. Now that we've got this pushed up into place, what we'll do is we'll need to begin getting ready to secure our upper bracket to the frame rail. Now normally the way that you would do this is use the U-bolts that are provided in the kit, and they would go up over the frame and come down through these holes that are on the outside edges of the plate on the bracket here. But because this truck is going to be having a 5th wheel installed at a later date, you can't use these brackets because they'll be in the way of the brackets that will mount to the outside of the frame for the 5th wheel hitch. So what we'll be doing is using these self-tapping screws, and we'll have to drill the hole through the center into the frame so that we can install the self-tapping screws. We'll need to make sure that we can get these holes as centered as possible on the frame rail. And we can take a small drill bit and begin drilling out a pilot hole in the center of that. So now that I've got a pilot hole started, I'll be able to step up drill bit sizes until I've reached the size indicated in the instructions. So then once we've got that hole drilled, we can take one of the 3/8 self-tapping screws and we'll just get it started up into that hole. We won't tighten it down all the way just yet. So that way we can still have a little bit of maneuverability in this bracket in order to drill that front hole out. Once we've got that hole drilled out, we can get the other self-tapper started on the front side. Once we've got both self-tappers started, we'll go back and tighten them both down. But we want to make sure when we tighten them down that we don't over-tighten them, because we will want to check the torque spec afterwards. So we just want to get this to be flush up against the bottom of the frame. Once we've got our 9/16 bolt tight on both the front and rear, we want to be sure to torque them to the specification listed in the instructions. Now we'll use this bracket provided in the kit in order to help tie up and re-secure this Ebrake cable. So you'll have to separate it, slide it over, then pinch it back together, but you may need some pliers in order to get it all the way back together. So with it lined back up, slide it back up the line here. Then I'll put the bolt up through, then I'll put the lock nut on top. I'll take my 1/2" wrench and tighten it down. We're ready to take our lower mounting bracket and strap it to the axle, and you want to make sure that it's centered so that that spring is as straight up and down as possible. Then I'll take my 3/8 carriage bolt, slide it down through the slot that's on the lower part of this bracket, and I'll do the same thing on the front side of the axle. Now I'll take my clamp bar with the open end that has the notches cut out facing up towards the axle so that the axle can go right in there. And you want to feed the carriage bolts through the holes in this clamp bar. Take a flat washer and a 3/8 nylon lock nuts and get those started by hand. And we can slide our carriage bolts inside those slots on the bracket in order to make sure that our clamp bar is straight front to rear on the vehicle and not in contact with the U-bolts for the leaf springs or for the shock mount here. Then we'll take a 9/16 socket and begin tightening up our bolt. And you want to get it so that they're pretty even, so if you need to go back and forth in order to keep the lock nuts pretty even on the carriage bolts, you can alternate. And once you've got some pressure with this clamp bar against the bottom side of the axle, then we'll take a torque wrench and tighten these down until they're torqued to the specification in the instructions. And while torquing it down, I'll continue to alternate to make sure that they don't get too uneven. Now we can use this 8mm bolt with flat washer and reinstall this bracket that holds our brake line. We'll use a 1/2" socket in order to tighten that down. We're ready to route our airline tubing, and before I do that, I'm going to cut the airline tubing that comes in the kit in half, and I'm going to use this tubing cutter to do so. If you'd like to get one, you can get that on our site, part number AL10530. So Just get it lined up there. Pinch down. And that helps give it a nice clean cut to make sure that it'll seal when you install it into the fitting. I've routed the Airline, and I did so by going into a hole in the frame here, and then I ran it along the inside of the frame. Continued through the frame until it came out the end of the frame rail. And then I just routed it over the wiring back here and towards the top of the license plate, where I'll end up mounting our valve and our fitting. Now I'll need to remove these little tabbed plastic nuts that held the screws for the license plate. You can take a pair of needle nose pliers and just squeeze those tabs in order to begin pushing that out from the bumper there. Now before sliding this through the hole there, what I'll need to do is install one of the nuts that comes in the kit for mounting up our air fitting. I'll run it down most of the way there. Then I can put a little star locking washer on there. Then I'll take my Airline and feed it up into place. Then you can install your license plate over those fittings. Once you have those pulled through, you can take your rubber washer, push it down over, install your flat washer, and then another one of the nuts. I'll use a 1/2 inch socket in order to get that tightened down to where it's nice and snug, and you know it's definitely not going to go anywhere. We'll take the tubing that we've got left over here with the fittings in place, and we'll want to get it routed so that it can go into our 90-degree elbow fitting at the top of the air spring. You want to be sure to give yourself a little bit excess so that the tubing can loop around so that there are no sharp angles. And I'll slide it in to that fitting. And you'll meet some resistance. And you'll need to push it in until it completely stops. Because once you meet that little bit of resistance, it should go a little bit farther because this holds it in with a friction lock. And you'll repeat that entire process for the other side. One thing that we're going to be doing here on the passenger side that we won't do on the driver's side is it comes with this heat shield to help guard this air spring from the heat of this exhaust. So in order to install it, you're going to take these tabs, you'll bend them down, and then in the center of that tab, you'll want to bend it back upwards so that it looks like that. And this way, you can install it up against the exhaust here so that the air spring is guarded from the exhaust at the point where they'll be closest together. In order to put that on, you'll need to take this large screw clamp and just get it started so that it's secure around the exhaust. There's going to be one more. Then you'll need to separate those so that you can slide those tabs in between them. You can begin to tighten down those screw clamps. Now I'll put some pressure in both of our air springs. Now we'll take a soapy water solution and spray down all our fittings to make sure that we don't have any leaks. That's going to complete our look at and installation of the Airlift Load Lifter 5000 air helper springs for the rear axle, part number AL57338 on our 2012 Chevrolet Silverado 3500 HD.
Click the link below to shop, learn more, or visit us at Etrailer.com.